Additive, multiplicative, both, or neither? Let's find out. Now in Division 2, terminology is a big thing that we utilise in order to understand what we mean and what others mean. If you start messing around with the terminology, you can get very skewed results, especially if someone tries to replicate what it is you're doing under their different usage of terminology. So if you say something is burst EPS and then you test in sustained, you are going to get very incorrect results, or vice versa. This is a big part of understanding what it is you are testing to ensure that you get accurate results. One of the huge misconceptions that all of us really have, me included, because I've recently just done this in a video of where I went over the interactions that some of the talents have. I was using terms like additive and multiplicative, which is pretty much the entire thing of this video. We're just going to utilize or go over these two terms, additive and multiplicative. Now it's typically, this has come from other games, growing up with other games and people being like, oh yeah, this is additive, you add to said thing. This is multiplicative, you multiply said thing. The problem is with division, you're able to do both simultaneously and just get the same results, simply just because we are working with percentages, which is kind of confusing but also not confusing. Now the order in which the calculation is done actively doesn't matter. I see a lot of people that say that you can do XYZ calculation and you have to do it in this order. You actually don't. This is the build I'm going to use to show this: 3-piece Providence, Contractors Foxes, Dod City Holster, Sacrifice, Gift. We're just going to calculate a single crit, so we don't need to do headshot and we don't need to know crit chance. Dod-Foamath has 44191 at base. We have 100% all weapon damage, 30% specific weapon damage, in this case AR, 137% critical hit damage, 25% total weapon damage, 8% damage to armor, 18% damage to targets out of cover, and a 30% amplifier from Perfect Glass Cannon. So they are our stats. Most people would do base times our all weapon damage plus our specific weapon damage times total weapon damage, crit damage, times DTA, times DTOP, times amp, which for the values we have is as follows: 44191 times 2.3 times 1.25 times 2.37 times 1.08 times 1.18 times 3. This will give us 498,849. Google coming in clutch. So if we now just completely rearrange it, do base times our amp times our critical hit damage times total weapon damage times DTA times our all weapon damage and specific weapon damage times damage to targets out of cover, that will give us this equation, which again equals the exact same thing. So as long as you have the correct values doing the correct thing, it doesn't actually matter what order you do it in. You can even do the base weapon damage times 44191 last, and you still get the same result. This is much to my own annoyance, just because if you can't put a logical pattern to something and stick with it, it kind of just frustrates me. Like you have your starter, your main course, and then your dessert. But the end result, even if you have your dessert, starter, and then your main course, the end result is you've eaten and you're full. It doesn't actually matter what order you do them in. I just like the logical idea of having starter, main course, dessert, but it really doesn't matter. It's beyond infuriating. Hopefully that clears up the ordering issue. Like, there is actually no order. We just give it an order ourselves to make us feel better. I see it so many times that you have to do the calculation in XYZ step by step. You really don't. People will add that to it because it makes them feel better. For example, I will always do what is like the red core calculation first, the all weapon damage, and then like the specific weapon damage, so Fenris, Sokolov, Badgertuff, things like that. Expertise, I will always do that first, simply just because when you look at your weapon in your stat screen, it will give you a number depending on how many red cores you have. I do those calculations first, because if I can't get that number to match, the rest of my calculations are going to be very far wrong. I at least need to get that number to match first before I can continue. It just makes me feel better about myself. That's literally all it is, and it's the same for literally everyone. Right, now it's going to be on to additive or multiplicative, or what the hell is actually going on. These are terms that we all throw around. I've thrown them around. I did a video not too long ago, like I said, with the interaction that some talents will have, and I specifically said this is additive, this is multiplicative, etc, etc. Now, annoyingly, and this is going to be so catch-22, it's not wrong, but it is also wrong, which makes no sense. To explain this issue, we are just going to look at red cores. We have a build with 6 red cores. Each red core is equal to 15% all weapon damage. The issue is, we have 6 of these, like so. Each of these is worth 15% all weapon damage. These add together, giving us 90% all weapon damage. From here, if we have a maxed out watch, that's another 10% all weapon damage. We're now at 100. If we have our specialization with, I'm going to go with ARs here, on AR, that's another 15% AR damage. This is the same as all weapon damage, it's only just subject to being on an AR. So we're now at 115% all weapon damage. Then on the AR itself, it will say, if you look directly at it, it will say 15% AR damage. We typically say if it's something like AR damage or SMG damage, we'll call this specific weapon damage. It interacts and acts the same way as all weapon damage, but only actually has a value when it's in your hand. If it's your secondary weapon, it doesn't matter. It has to be in your hand. In order to get AR damage, you need to have that AR in your hand, ready to shoot something in the head with it. So when all is said and done, your typical red build, not looking at expertise just yet, 6 red cores, that's 90%. Maxed out watch, that's another 10%. Specialization, 15. Your actual weapon itself, 15. Which just gives us this, 90 plus 10 plus 15 plus 15 equals 130. However, we are working in percentages, so we need to put a decimal in there, placing it on the 10th, which looks pretty much like this. Now the issue is we need to put this onto our AR, and we're just going to use Dod-Foamath here. And because we're working in percentages, it allows us that now we're utilizing decimals, we can either just add, which is the long way around. So we'll do Dod-Foamath 44191 plus 100%, 44191. Then we can just find 10% by moving the decimal over one place, and then just add 10%, 4419.1. which gives us the lovely number of 101,639.3. Or, because we're just working in percentages, we just do 44191 times 1, which is our base value, plus 1.3, which is our red cores, and we get the exact same result. This interaction I have just gone through works the same for pretty much every value in the game, minus amplifiers. This is what we call the bucket method, typically. So, this is our weapon damage bucket. Everything that is or equated to weapon damage is thrown in that bucket, given a shake, it all adds together, and then the bucket itself is multiplicative with everything. This is true for pretty much every stat in the game, minus 2. However, your damage to armor, that gets its own bucket. Total weapon damage, that gets its own bucket. It's the same for damage to targets out of cover, damage to health. There are, like I said, kind of 2 exceptions. Well, there is definitely one exception. The other is a bit weird. The first one is amplifiers. Each amplifier gets its very own individual little bucket. No ifs, no buts. Amplifiers cannot be put together, simply just because as well you can't really have more than one of the same amplifier on a build. I would love to see 2 glass cannons, that would be hilarious. The second one is going to be crit and headshot. Now, all of your critical hit damage will go into one bucket, add up and you will get your critical hit damage. This is also the same with headshot. However, when you get a critical headshot, your critical hit damage and your headshot add together. They're essentially, crit and headshots are two small buckets that are both inside a larger bucket, and the larger bucket only comes into play with critical headshots. The rest of the time, crit is its own bucket, headshot is its own bucket. Now, just to potentially confuse the situation, because I have no idea if this made any sense to anyone whatsoever, an easy way to look at this is the individual things are additive, but the role it has is multiplicative. For example, vigilance itself is additive, but it gives you total weapon damage, which the total weapon damage bucket is multiplicative. I don't know if that's just confused it worse or maybe explained it a bit better. But yeah, the whole additive multiplicative thing, it's not necessarily wrong, but it's not exactly correct either. Technically speaking, in the grounds of what is multiplicative, we only have two things left in the game that are, which is Intimidate and Hunter's Fury. Anyway, I am hoping this has cleared a few things up. Essentially, in order to know what's going on, you just have to throw everything into its own correct bucket and then multiply them together, and it doesn't matter what order you have these buckets in. Just do what makes sense for you. And if you are going to use terms like additive and multiplicative, make sure you clarify what they are actually meaning. Have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.